unpacking today's headlines. This is Souls and Liberty in Depth.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to In Depth, the production of Souls and Liberty, brought to you in partnership with MyPillow.com.
We do not need to be afraid of the future. Embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy.
Catholic Vice President J.D. Vance has come out swinging on behalf of young people. And he should. He's a young people. He's only 39. The Veep made heads explode a few days back when he gently scolded, maybe not so gently, European leaders that they were failing to protect their future. Translation, your actions today are robbing the youth of their future tomorrow. He concluded his remarks with a reference to St. Pope John Paul, who loved young people and constantly spoke out for them.
We do not need to be afraid of the future. Embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, "Do not be afraid." We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all. Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Why are the last two generations, those under 40, so trapped in hopelessness and despair? Well, because those conditions that are engendering those feelings, they were engineered. They were engineered to suck the hope out of them and instill fear in its place. We didn't get to this level by accident. Families were shattered, beginning with the sexual revolution. Tens of millions of children have no father or no father to speak of. Addictions of all sorts are off the charts as the young reach out to medicate their pain. What no one's really talking about, however, is the cause of the pain. Simply put, it's the devil trying to, and often succeeding, eradicating hope and joy, especially from the young. If their hope and joy can be robbed from them little by little, then the future, from their perspective, will be hopeless. Take a look at this map we've got in front of you here. It's Europe, from the Atlantic to the Ural Mountains in Russia. It's where Christianity, Catholicism, took hold after 3 centuries of brutal persecution by the Caesars of Rome. It's the cradle of Western civilization, and Western civilization was brought into being by the Catholic Church. It was grounded in the belief, first delivered by God to the Jews, that God is one, and that God created man in his own divine image and likeness. That has been the grounding of preaching by the Church from the Atlantic to the Urals for millennia. Yes, it happened haltingly, it certainly did, and sporadically, and oftentimes in flawed manners owing to flawed human beings, but that arc of civilization towards justice and fairness, well, it stretched inevitably towards the truth. The Church carried that further in law and culture and even politics to declare that owing to that God-given dignity, man possesses certain rights and that no government can overthrow those rights. In 1982, sensing the demise of the Jewish Catholic enunciated truth across the European continent, let's go back to the map here and take a look at this. So look at that red pin there in the far northwest corner of Spain. It was right there that Pope John Paul II stood with his back to the Atlantic, speaking across all of Europe to the Urals, and declared the following to the entire heart of Western civilization. I, Bishop of Rome and pastor of the Universal Church, from Santiago, address to you, Old Europe, a cry full of love. Return to yourself. Be yourself. Discover your origins. Revive your roots. Experience again those authentic values that made your history glorious. Bellowing across 2,000 miles of Europe more than 40 years ago, the Pope pleaded with European leaders to not betray the young, to not rob them of their future, to safeguard their rights and freedoms grounded in the truth of their origin in Almighty God. For the past 40 years, they have done exactly the opposite, and not only caused a gloom to fall over the youngest citizens, but they exported that misery to the United States. The young are hope-filled by nature, which is why wicked men have set about to destroy and deceive the young so that their futures will be lost. This is what J.D. Vance was declaring to them, being a member of that group himself. Stop stealing the future from the young. He didn't quote St. John Paul by accident. It was very much intentional. All right, joining me now to talk about what's happening here in the United States to roll back the assault on those values is Rod Martin, CEO of Martin Capital, and who helped create PayPal. That's quite the it's quite the single accomplishment amidst all the other ones. Rod, thanks for joining us. How you doing, brother?
Great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, there's so much going on right now, in DC. As an old news guy myself, I there's no way. There's just, you can't keep up with this stuff because each thing that happens has 75 knock-ons, and then each one of those has a knock-on, and the original things are happening at a pace it's drinking from a fire hose, trying to anyway. When you look out on all of this, what's your kind of 60,000 foot assessment?
Well, I think we've just had an extraordinary month. And, what has to be understood is that this has been an 80-year period starting under FDR in which we have gone out of our way, not so much to eviscerate the power of the president, because when there's a Democrat president, of course, they want him to have power, but to eviscerate the meaning of elections. So what do I mean by that? Well, if you have a permanent bureaucracy that is insulated from firing, isn't accountable to the executive branch at all, can make law, can prosecute breaches of the laws it makes in its own courts, and until the overturning of Chevron, actually, you didn't even have a guaranteed appeal to a constitutional Article 3 court. When you create a system like that, what you're really doing, especially after you staff it almost entirely with Democrats, is you're just perpetuating Democrat rule no matter who wins an election. It's all about eviscerating elections. And so what Donald Trump is doing is just extraordinary. He's asserting Article 2, Section 1, the executive power shall be vested in the President of the United States. He's actually asserting the Constitution. And because of what he did in the first term, getting us a 6-3 Supreme Court majority, I think he's going to be very successful with that. I think there's a decent chance they're going to overturn some of the really bad case law that enabled this in the New Deal era, just as they did the Chevron case from 1984. And I think the net result of this is that elections have to matter, and Donald Trump is making them matter. When the Democrats said that democracy was on the ballot, they weren't wrong. They were just lying about their intent.
Yeah, it just didn't turn out the way they meant it.
Right. What they mean by our democracy is rule by Democrats.
Right.
And certainly not rule by elections. If the voters change their mind, they want their worldview to continue in power no matter what. And if you've been frustrated from administration to administration to administration all through our lifetime, that's why. Right.
Yeah, nothing really seems to change because you might rearrange the furniture in the house, but the rooms are where the rooms are. They haven't ripped out the plumbing and making what used to be the living room now the kitchen. I mean, the fundamental changes that needed to happen, didn't. So it was just all window dressing and, you got some new furniture, hung up some new drapes or whatever, and it looked like something different, which on one very shallow level it is. But, How would you describe this? Because I see this debate all the time in social media. Would you say that we're in the middle of a counter-revolution or a revolution?
Well, I have used the term counter-revolution in an article on rodmartin.org that did really, really well. So
Yes.
I guess
I should admit I asked you a loaded question.
Yeah, I mean, the truth is it is pretty revolutionary, whether you want to call it counter or not. What you're talking about is an 80-year form of government that was completely ultra vires, completely beyond constitutional limits, subversive of the Constitution. They kept the forms but not the substance, which is no different than when the Roman Republic fell. Right. The Roman Empire never actually called Caesar Augustus an emperor. He didn't even have all that impressive a title. Just like Deng Xiaoping was never higher than vice chairman of the Communist Party of China. Yeah, but he was the dictator. Yeah. And that's what we've been contending with. We've had this honestly alien form of government imposed upon us since the 1930s. And Donald Trump is tearing it down.
What do you think is his major, the opposition that's coming to him, obviously deep state, uniparty, all that stuff, but where do you think is the locus of that is now? Are they really as discombobulated as they appear to be? Or is there some sort of secret cabal somewhere like Obama's house in the basement? I mean, where do you think the center of the opposition is? Or is there a center?
Well, as you know, in communist theory and practice, there are always, party members and then fellow travelers who don't identify themselves as with the party, and then legions of useful fools. That's Lenin's formulation of it, and you see that in all these things. There are a handful of people who actually get how this all works and why it works the way it works, and they're desperate to defend it. But the vast majority have just bought into the lie. Oh, well, that agency needs to be independent. Oh, this needs to be beyond politics. It's never beyond politics.
Sure, it's not.
Personnel is policy. The people are always going to act in line with their worldview. So when you staff the entire government with Democrats and you put it beyond the reach of the elected branches, it's going to rule as a bunch of Democrats. Now, who's the center of the opposition? I think they're going to struggle because you've got a decent number of Democrats who have completely drunk the Kool-Aid. They're completely true believers in the ideology. AOC, others like her, they aren't terribly practical. And then you have the more practical people who want to win elections, and they're really going to need to now because the elections are going to matter more. And they do not have a majority within the Democrat Party. So, what you're seeing is very analogous to what happened under Reagan, where lots of Democrats who are actually very conservative, they just weren't in love with the Republican Party. But because of Ronald Reagan, they made the switch. And the fact that we're getting some people like Tulsi Gabbard and like RFK, who definitely don't agree with us on a number of core things,
sure.
Elon Musk, these guys coming over tells you we're in the process of a real realignment.
Well, heck, Rod, if I just interrupt you, so add to that list, at the top of that list would be Donald Trump himself.
Absolutely. Lifelong Democrat. Now, if you go back and you read his books from the 1990s, one in particular, Art of the Comeback from 1997, the whole last chapter is about what he would do if he were president. And it reads like he wrote it yesterday.
Right.
So, he's always been with us on a certain level. He just didn't know he was. It's like Ronald Reagan himself. He said, I didn't leave the Democrat Party. The Democrat Party left me.
Mm-hmm.
And
former Democrat. Yep.
The shift to the left in the Democrat Party over the last 25 years is over the top. It's statistically validated. They always want to say, oh, those Republicans are just moving to the crazy right. No, we're kind of where we were 25 years ago. We just don't have rhinos running our party anymore.
Right.
And those guys have gone hard left on every imaginable issue. I want to remind you, Barack Obama ran for office every single time he ran, Senate and president, in opposition to gay marriage.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Isn't that
was
funny?
The mainstream of the Democrat Party. And now we're lopping off, children's privates. I mean, and forcing it as a matter of law in places like Tim Walz's state.
Yeah,
so it's shifted dramatically, and it's left a lot of people behind. That's why you have a guy like Bill Maher on TV making our case half the time. Half the time he isn't, but he's still sane. And these guys, it's not so much that they're insane. It's that they're real socialists, and they really mean it.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's from a philosophical standpoint on the part of the Democrats, you see all these constant things on these discussions on CNN and MSNBC about, well, it was the messaging. Well, we didn't do a good job like targeting who we should have been doing. Blah, blah, blah. And by messaging, I mean advertising. I don't mean what their policies they're trying to push. And it somehow, you listen to them and it's like, do you not understand that the vast majority of Americans simply don't want millions of illegal aliens, for example, pouring across the border? I mean, it's like they don't get that if only they would have argued more successfully for millions to come across the border, Kamala would have won. That's what it sounds like. So it sounds like they're dealing in reality.
Well, sometimes you'll hear Democrats make the argument, and some rhinos also. Illegal aliens have a lower crime rate than the rest of the population. Well, first of all, that's wrong, because every one of them committed a crime when they entered the country illegally.
Right.
And if you go to Mexico illegally, they'll put you in prison for 2 years.
Sure.
So let's not mince words there. They're all criminals. But if you're talking about their violent crime rate, the rate is irrelevant. Even one violent crime by an illegal alien is one more than the law allowed. We actually have a door. You don't have to break in the window. And we're really generous with it. We allow in 1.1 million legal immigrants every year. That's more than the population of 8 states.
Right.
Over a 3-year period, that's more than the population of the state of Arkansas. Over a 6-year period, that's more than the population of either Arizona or Massachusetts. This is a huge, huge number of legal immigrants, and that doesn't even count asylum seekers.
Right.
So to pretend that America is ungenerous is a joke. We are the most generous country on earth when it comes to immigration. We just ask you to do it legally. And people are fed up.
Yeah, a good friend of mine who was from England, well, he is from England, but is now here, did the same thing. Immigrated here and, had to go through all the thousands of dollars and the paperwork and the month or year, whatever it was. I'm sorry, 6 months or year, whatever it was, that whole process took. My mom had to do that. She was Irish English descent, met my dad in England in the 1950s. And I mean, she's married to an Air Force, an airman. And she doesn't get automatic citizenship. So it's kind of weird, this expectation. And by the way, for the record, I helped her study for her naturalization test and was there when she put her hand up and took the oath. So yeah, absolutely. This whole idea that, you don't like him. I mean, they're blurring the language. They're deliberately kind of trying to erase, borders within the vocabulary and just conflating all these terms because it makes you sound mean. And, of course, America is not against immigration. That's how we all got here one way or another. But it's the illegal.
Even the Indians.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Everybody came from somewhere else. That's not the issue. The issue is how you go about it. And honestly, again, most generous system in the world. So the lies just compound. And it's a terrible, terrible thing. This illegal immigration creates a permanent criminal underclass that's always looking over its shoulder and is always potentially subject to blackmail. So that's one. And the Democrats know exactly who they are and how to find them. So they can always be blackmailed. There are always going to be people who, if you talk them into going and voting, are going to vote for Democrats. And Rasmussen had some great polling last year that showed that about 10% of the electorate was actually, or rather 10% of illegal aliens actually voted in the last couple of elections. So it's a shocking number of people, but it gets worse because it depresses wages. It puts these people in a vulnerable class where they can't be paid what we claim to think is proper.
Right.
It also subjects them to human trafficking, to the whims of the cartels, all these terrible, terrible assaults on human dignity. And just for good measure, even if they're not stuffing ballot boxes, they're stuffing election districts. Every time you add a bunch of illegal aliens to California, you artificially inflate their number of representatives in the House, their number of electoral votes in the Electoral College, their ability to affect the outcome of a presidential election. And that's before we even get to state legislative races. That's before we get to local stuff. This is a giant fraud on the American people, enabled by a deep state that is not accountable to the elected branches.
What do you think? I want to stick on elections for a second, then I want to skip over to Doge, but another election question. We've got midterms here, a year and a half-ish out, which seems really weird because didn't we just have a presidential election like last week? So here we are.
That's never over.
Yeah, they're never over. Politics are never over, and certainly elections they just kind of ebb and flow, but they're never gone. Do you think, or do you know, perhaps from conversations with people haven't heard really much talk about anything decisive when it comes to election integrity and election reform? I know there's little things going on in different states all over the place, some of that relating back to 2020, like what's going on in Arizona right now. But I don't hear anything kind of on a national basis that, again, just not hearing about it. I don't know if it's going on or not, but your thoughts on that? I mean, we got to, you can't lose. Trump's party can't lose control of one or both houses of Congress in the midterms.
Oh, yeah. If we lose the House, they'll just impeach him for the color of his underwear or something. And we've seen that repeatedly. They've made impeachment a joke and just political theater. It didn't help. I don't know why they would have done that, but that's what they did. So, you end up with just this insane level of obstruction. But as a practical matter on reforming elections, I'm a tech guy by background. I was one of the early guys at PayPal. We do a lot of technology investing in Martin Capital. I can just tell you, there is no voting machine that isn't hackable. It is impossible to build a voting machine that isn't hackable. And in fact, the Democrats used to be all over this. They used to have YouTube videos showing small children hacking voting machines in a matter of minutes because they were terrified Donald Trump will steal an election. No, and you'll notice they all shut up about that going into 2020. Kamala Harris actually proposed a bill for paper ballots in 2019 and then just completely shut up about it going into 2020. And there's a reason. So you have to have paper ballots. You really need to have same day voting. You need to have early voter registration, not same day. That's just begging for fraud.
Sure it is.
Mail-in ballots, that's crazy. Absentee ballots, that's okay with the kinds of protections we used to have. And you got to have voter ID. And by the way, if you have a single election day, you can do the inked thumbs that we did in Iraq and Afghanistan, which proved to be really effective and really dramatically reduced fraud. You never eliminate fraud, but you can significantly reduce it. And that's really all we need. You see that in the most recent election. For the most part, states that had voter ID laws voted for Trump, and states that didn't went the other way.
Shocking.
By whatever means. It was just ridiculously stark when you mapped it. Voter integrity changes the game. I'll give you one other example of that. Here in Florida, we have averaged about a 1-point spread between the Republican and Democrat candidate for governor for a generation. And it's about a 1-point spread over and over. And the Republicans have eked out a win all of those times, but just barely. Ron DeSantis in 2018 won by 0.4 And then he did a bunch of really good election reform, not everything he needs to do, but a lot of great stuff, everything he could get done. And lo and behold, he wins his reelection by 19.4%.
Yeah.
And we win the school board in Miami-Dade County, and Trump carries Miami-Dade County, and DeSantis carry Palm Beach County, which is just unthinkable. So, yeah, election integrity is essential, and you'd get a very different government if we had it. That tells you everything you need to know about who is behind it.
Yeah, and it's not a question for the viewer's perspective or information. It's not a question of whether a state is red or blue. That's fine on the top level examination, but when you start to go down, it's like, particularly 2024, how far did even a blue state move towards the red? You take New Jersey, for example. I mean, that came within 5 points. That's New Jersey. You kidding me? That's like a 20-point stronghold in blue. So when you see a 15-point swing, I mean, yeah, people were upset about gas and eggs, but were they a 15-point swing upset about it? And, you know, look what happened in Pennsylvania and all these numbers you keep seeing of more Republicans being registered and overtaking Democrats, registered voters, party members, all that sort of thing. I mean, this is all definitely shifting to the right. And, you know, that famous little clip with Jake Tapper and whoever the political analyst was on election night. He says, okay, show us whatever counties that, you know, Kamala did better in than Joe Biden. And the guy brings up the board, and it was completely blank. He goes, none. He goes, what? Yeah. Not one? Nope, not one. And, you know, you got to say, and of course, they're looking at the presidential race there. You got to say, with all of the eyeballs that were on that thing, like the Republican legal teams, everybody were absolutely, 2020 is not going to repeat it, at least on the presidential level. And it makes you wonder if all this stuff became solidified in law, what would happen?
Well, exactly. And some of this is because it was too big to rig. That effort was spot on. And, you know, John Fund was talking about this when he was talking about election fraud 20 years ago, that if you can put it more than 5 points spread, the Republican frequently wins, but if it's within that, it's within the margin that's easy to cheat with. Now, I would suggest that today, with the electronic voting systems we have in place, it might not even matter, but it would have been impossible to maintain that Donald Trump had lost that election, and they would have gotten court challenges. And the real Achilles heel to the whole thing is that most of the fraud we saw in 2020 was in districts where the Democrats controlled not just the election machinery, but the prosecuting attorneys, the judges, everything. There was no danger of getting prosecuted. And in 2024, there was a very measurable chance of getting prosecuted, and it made a difference. Now, I think that they definitely cheated in down ballot races in a number of places. We just published an article today on that at rodmartin.org. You should check it out. The vote by mail scam, I think we're about to be able to blow the lid off of. It's just shocking. And that case is here in Florida, of all crazy places, where, you know, we're pretty clean. You can just imagine California. On the other hand, in California, I'm not sure they have to cheat that much because they absolutely control the government. They can just do whatever they want.
Right.
And some of the more artful things that we're seeing in other parts of the country, they may not even feel the need to engage in. So there's a lot to do. And at the federal level, it's a little hard because elections are actually a function of the states. And we're federalists and we believe in that. But on the other hand, you'll recall after the 2000 election, where George Bush won over Al Gore by 537 votes in one state, we passed the Help America Vote Act. The federal government can absolutely regulate federal elections, and usually county clerks don't have the budget not to apply whatever those reforms are to the rest of their elections. Right. So you can indirectly make a pretty big difference. And I think it's time that we did. And some of that could be done by executive order, but we really need legislation.
Sure. I mean, Mike Johnson was, at CPAC earlier, and he said, we're gonna, President Trump has signed 300-ish executive orders, and we're going to start trying to push those through legislatively, so the next guys can't come in and just undo them. I mean, they got about a year, maybe a little less, to get all of that done legislatively, and of course, we know the Democrats will pull every roadblock and hurdle, put up every one of them they possibly can. But at the end of the day, you got the muscle and you got to use it, even if it is, minimal. You got to use it. So,
well, and we saw an example of that at 4:20 a.m. this morning.
All right.
Mike Lee got his Lee amendment passed in the Senate, which is just remarkable. I can't believe he pulled it off.
So explain to the viewers what that is.
Yes. The gist of the thing is Congress may not delegate its lawmaking power to an agency.
Right.
Well, that's kind of a big deal. That should just be basic constitutional law. And until the New Deal, that's called non-delegation doctrine. Congress may not delegate its powers. And by the way, neither can the executive, neither can the courts. This is a separation of powers problem, and you see it in our agencies. I'll just take one example, the EPA. The EPA makes environmental law. Well, how does it have the power to do that? Well, Congress just lets it. Okay. And it also prosecutes violations of those laws. What? The lawmakers are also prosecuting? That doesn't make sense. They're also administering the law, another executive function, and they're doing it in courts within the EPA. So the same group of people is judge, jury, and executioner.
Right.
And law.
And lawmaker, right.
So the whole thing is horribly corrupt. It's horribly unconstitutional. Some of that can be fixed by executive order, but some of that does need legislation, and even more of it needs the overturning of some key Supreme Court rulings from the past, Humphrey's executor being the most obvious.
Yeah, there are, I think from a man on the street who wants things fixed and, his money back, the government is ripped off from him by the trillions, all of that. I think perhaps the Republican leadership, a J.D. Vance type, or even the president, need to sort of get out there and keep saying, as you've pointed out, this is an 80-year problem, and you don't fix it in a week. We're gonna fix it, and it's gonna be done, and you can see us doing that right now. But undoing 80 years of something takes a while, especially with some entrenched opposition.
Democrats basically overthrew the government in the 1930s with wild popular support. And that's not shocking, because that kind of thing frequently has wild popular support at the time.
Right.
If you have a Great Depression or a World War or whatever, you've got an opportunity to, as Rahm Emanuel would say,
never let a good crisis go to waste.
and we're still living with that.
Yeah.
And so, this is about, we talk about make America great again. This is about make elections matter again.
Mm-hmm.
And Trump has to be all over that, as he is. If J.D. Vance picks that up, Ron DeSantis picks that up, Ted Cruz picks that up, these guys are out there on the front line. Whoever wins the Republican nomination in 28 has a really good shot at getting elected and having 2 terms to finish this process.
Yeah. I mean, you got to establish now, before the midterms, that this is the goal. We need 10 years to fix the past 80. I don't think that's unreasonable. I think most people would say that. You can just say to somebody, "Hey, Mr. Joe, middle class, you got yourself into $100,000 worth of credit card debt. You make $41,000 a year. That's not going to be fixed in a year. You begin the process immediately, but it's going to happen over time." I don't think that's a hard argument to make, because everybody understands that.
Yeah, I mean, it's very much like eating an elephant. How do you do that? One bite at a time. Right. So, Reagan is getting some criticism these days from younger conservatives who didn't live through that. And I've written some about that because it's just horribly wrong. Of course, the man made some mistakes here and there. He was human, but he was a transformative president. And yet, one bite at a time. He won the Cold War, for heaven's sake. He cut taxes from a top rate of 70% all the way down to 28. I mean, he gave us the IRA and 401k revolution that transferred, in Leninist terms, the means of production from the bourgeoisie to the proletariat. Right. When Reagan took office, just 15% of Americans had $5,000 or more in investments. By the end of the Reagan Revolution, that number had reached 70%. You know, it was this extraordinary number of people who suddenly owned part of the U.S. economy and had a stake in things. And it just makes a tremendous. So, you know, all these things had to happen. We had to get off the inflation carousel. We had to get off the every 2.5 year recessions that we'd had since the end of World War II. And Reagan gave us all of that and much, much more. He was also the most pro-life president ever until Trump. And at the same time, he couldn't do everything. He had a Democrat House that was overwhelming. They aren't going to pass a lot of things he wants done. He never had a Republican House, ever. He had a Republican Senate briefly, and it was mostly rhinos. Right. So there was if he wanted to win the Cold War, he had to give a little on some other things. And now we're past all that. And Donald Trump is in a position to take that next bite of the elephant. Yeah. And this could be the tipping point.
It sure seems like it. Rob, we're going to step away for one moment here and come back to you right after this break. But when we come back, I want to talk about Elon and Doge and not that specifically, but really what they're finding, what they're uncovering. You know, somewhere there's got to be a bottom to that pit. So we'll talk about that when we come back. In the short term, everybody, just if you like what we talk about here and how we talk about it and all of that, please find that donate button and just click on it and help us stay in existence. Much appreciated. Okay, back right after this.
I'm excited to announce that we're having our first ever mega sale on overstock clearance and brand new products. For example, save over 50% on this season's flannel sheets. Queen size only $59.98. Kings only $69.98. They sell out fast every year, so order now. Save 20% on our brand new My Crosses. They're designed in the likeness of the one I've worn every day for over 20 years. They come in men's and women's, and they're made right here in the USA. Get our 2025 six-piece My Towel sets for only $29.98. Our initial quantities are extremely low, so get them now before they go. And our best-selling standard My Pillows, just $14.98. So go to MyPillow.com or call the number on your screen. Use this promo code to take advantage of our first ever mega sale. But wait, remember that $75 free shipping rule? Well, that ship is sale because right now, every order ships absolutely free.
All right, we're talking with Rod Martin, and knowledgeable dude sitting there in his Bermuda hat in sunny Florida. A little chilly, but Rod, we're Doge and Elon and all the. I mean, everything on the Democratic side is always these personal attacks. Oh, he sucks. Oh, he's this. Oh, he's a Nazi. You understand when he and his team keep revealing what it is they're revealing. You kind of understand why they're losing their minds over him. But I mean, this has long ago far surpassed anything of, a little amount of money. I mean, it looks like we're coming up on trillions of dollars of waste, abuse, negligence, fraud, and people are starting to go, what? Some people need to go to prison.
Yeah, absolutely. And look, they constantly just invert things. They're always projecting. They're always inverting. We have a Nazi in the White House. Well, it's a funny kind of Nazi who slashes regulations, slashes government spending, and slashes government power. That's like the anti-Nazi, and of course that's obvious.
Who has some Jewish grandchildren whose son-in-law is Jewish. I don't know. I just don't think that would have been flown very well in the Reichstag.
It's completely crazy. And of course, you see them on CBS, You have an anchor actually saying to Marco Rubio that the reason we had a Holocaust under the Nazis was their free speech policies. Are you kidding? Adolf Hitler allowed free speech? This is news. I mean, this is a huge historical revelation that no one has ever found before. So, the left in America is so dishonest that it has ceased to even realize when it's lying a lot of the time. And it's just extraordinary. Now, what Elon's finding in some ways shouldn't surprise us, and yet it's still shocking. He went into Twitter. He fired 80% of the staff and the place kept running. I mean, that was your model. And so he's got a little harder edge to this than some people might have, and certainly than Republicans have ever had. Right. And so Donald Trump turns him loose on basically audits. What can we find that shouldn't ought to be? And it's staggering. He hasn't even gotten into the Pentagon yet. Department of Education, they're just starting. There are all these different things that need attention. But let's just start with USAID. I mean, USAID is supposedly our principal foreign aid agency. It wasn't even created by Congress. Like the EPA, it was created by an executive order. Mm-hmm. Oh, my goodness. And it's just lasted all this time. And when Joni Ernst in the Senate tried to investigate what they were doing, they blew her off.
Yeah, they just wouldn't give her any information.
And they told her, we're a charitable organization. We're beyond politics. You don't have any rights to oversee us. Wait, you're a government agency spending tax dollars. Yeah. What are you talking about? Right. Well, it gets worse than that. USAID's budget has been 3 times that of the CIA, because honestly, a lot of that money is being spent on behalf of the CIA. Mm-hmm. And that's how we hide it. It's bigger than the CIA and the State Department combined, and completely immune to oversight for decades, since before I was born. Right. Are you kidding? Well, we find out why. It was USAID money that engineered the color revolution in Ukraine. It was USAID money that was funding ISIS in part. USAID money went to pay for 300,000 forced sterilizations of young Native women in Peru. Right. USAID money, it turns out, went to influence the outcome, not just of foreign elections, but American elections. Yeah. American elections. It was USAID money that funded the assaults on Rudy Giuliani. It was USAID money that kept Politico in business. It was USAID money indirectly money laundered through some charities that pays about a quarter of Christianity Today's budget. Mm-hmm. And oddly enough, those guys all endorsed Kamala Harris. You wouldn't expect a bunch of evangelical leaders to be endorsing Kamala Harris.
That's very surprising.
But, wait, they did just at the moment they got a ton of money. Yeah. And that money came, again, kind of laundered through, but ultimately from USAID. And there are just example after example. So this is a rogue operation within the government. And you can kind of see the case for, we have a slush fund somewhere to overthrow foreign governments we don't like. Okay, but you don't get to have a slush fund to overthrow the American government. Right. And that's what's been up to, not just in the last 4 years or the last 8 years, but for the last 6 decades. Right. It is a horrible, horrible thing. Now, that's just one agency. Right. And there are hundreds that are doing horrible things. And we're going to get that under control.
Yeah, it's really funny when you go do an AI search, like Elon said on stage. I went and asked on like 3 or 4 different ones, and none of them could actually give me a number of how many agencies there actually are. There seemed to be somewhere between 420 and 470. I'm like, really? That's a pretty big spread. I mean, you can't settle within 15 or 20% of the total number of agencies that our taxpayer dollars go to. 450 agencies? Really?
Yeah, and that makes sense, perhaps, if you're talking about the intelligence community, where we admit to 17 agencies and a superstructure agency with the new director of national intelligence And by the way, Tulsi Gabbard is going to be a wonderful, wonderful person for that role. And you may recall that Kash Patel was the principal deputy there and was also chief of staff at the Pentagon. So you're talking about the most qualified guy for FBI director in the history of the Bureau. Right. And they're tearing him down all the time. He's not qualified. Hegseth isn't qualified. Gabbard is a Russian asset.
Well, they are now.
It's absurd.
They are now. They have the title, the office, the budget, and the information. So whatever they want to say about what was, it's good. It's good, actually, in a good way, Brian. We can be unburdened by what was, because here we are.
Yeah. Exactly. If there are some secret intel agencies, we can understand that.
Sure.
But there shouldn't be secret in the open agencies. There should be a very clear consensus. Okay, these are the things that are arms of our government. This is what we give them in terms of budget every year, et cetera. And you're right. It's nebulous and unclear. And there's no accountability in that. The voters can't make a meaningful choice if the government's just going to do whatever it wants, regardless of the outcome of elections. That's how it has been for most of the last 80 years at a tremendous level. It's not that Nixon wasn't able to do things and Johnson wasn't able to do things and Eisenhower wasn't able to do things, but they were relatively superficial things in many cases compared to the real work of government that was being conducted by Democrats, no matter who won.
So let me ask you this from a philosophical standpoint, because I really think people need to understand. You want to get lost in the weeds. The weeds need attacking. They need mowing down. All that needs clearing. That's true. But when you have to ask, how did the weeds get here, and how did they get to where they are now? When we're talking about things going back 60 years, well, I mean, those people are all dead now, or they're ready to die. But you stretch back to the 30s. So was this always a ninth level chess game being played and orchestrated by certain people who just were willing to say, this is going to take 100 years to overthrow America, and I won't be around to see it, but I'll go to my grave being excited that I was part of it? Or is this something that just kind of grew, organically, and once it got to a certain level, bad actors in the deep state saw, here's a mechanism we have. I mean, this is always the case, do you think, or did this just morph as years went by?
Well, again, there's always that handful of people who are really in on it and get it. And then lots of people who buy the emotional manipulation arguments for doing it. And it's pretty emotional to be going through the Great Depression. So, something has to change. There ought to be a law. So, FDR had tremendous ability and tremendous leverage to make radical change. And you'll recall that much of that got knocked down by the Supreme Court.
Correct.
For the first term. And then he scared the Supreme Court into submission in 1937, and they started ruling his way on nearly everything. And he had time to start replacing justices. So,
right.
If you have 8 or 12 years, and Roosevelt was elected for 4 terms, but died at the beginning of his 4th. So about 12 years, you can do a tremendous amount of stuff.
Sure.
If you're pretty ruthless about it, as he was. And he had public support to do that. So yes, they established this system to operate kind of on autopilot, and it really flows from a generational mindset, a worldview that the public is kind of stupid and kind of amateurish, and the world is very advanced now. And so we have to be ruled by experts, or the wheels will come off of everything. But it's more than a little ironic that in that exact same period, we had an even higher degree of central planning in the Soviet Union, and the Soviet Union collapsed.
Right.
And we had an even higher degree of central planning in China. And the wheels came off of that so much that they had to reintroduce market principles to a limited but very meaningful degree.
Sure.
And we saw the entire Soviet bloc collapse and move the other direction. And yet somehow we think that our experts are smarter than their experts. No. And Hayek describes this in flawless detail in The Road to Serfdom, which he published in 1944. It was illegal where he was writing from, which was Great Britain, to criticize the Soviet Union. So he didn't compare the British Labour Party and nationalizations there to the Communist Party of the Soviet Union. Rather, he compared it to Nazi Germany, which he could criticize.
Sure.
And he demonstrates clearly fascism, Nazism, communism, social democracy, democratic socialism, they're all just degrees of the same thing.
It's the same
and
thing.
They all end up in the same thing. You are reduced to servitude, which, by the way, know your place, peasant, because the truth is the experts are in the room. They're talking.
Yeah. You sort of
That's the
quiet
mindset. And
that's
Trump
exactly
rejects
it.
all of that.
Let me switch
Trump
gears.
rejects all of that.
Yeah, he absolutely does. He says, no, this is not the way it's going to be. This needs to be, orchestrated and run by people. Is there particularly people who have some regard for their country? Switch gears for a moment. Let me ask you about what do you think the role of religion is in all of this? Of course, we have the U.S. bishops, a few days ago, file a emergency appeal trying to get a temporary restraining order against Trump's executive action that got shot down by a court. The case will go forward, but the restoration of all of those tens of millions in funds, that's still not happening, at least for the moment. But more than perhaps just the USCCB, but all of it. It seems that there is religion, I guess I'll say it kind of generically, Christianity, imbuing certain parts of this. In J.D. Vance's speech at CPAC, his comments at Munich, at the Munich Security Council, he never hesitates to bring up religion, specific for him, specifically as Catholicism. But and good for him. It needs to be done. But why do you think so many people on the right look to or incorporate at least religious language in this counter-revolution?
Well, bearing in mind that I am actually not a Catholic, I'm actually a recent former officer of the executive committee of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is the largest Protestant denomination in the country. But, we have a few theological disagreements, obviously, but we're in the same fight. And to hear J.D. Vance go on TV, not on Christian TV, on a regular news show in a regular interview and just present the gospel as plain as day, as well as any Baptist preacher might possibly do it, or Catholic missionary, either one. J.D. Vance is just a godsend. What an amazing guy. And that should be in the public square. The left's religion, think of theirs perhaps as an atheology, is dominant among our elites. And they try to impose that on the rest of us, and they're somewhat successful. We are certainly marinated in their worldview to some degree. And you see that all the time, even among Republicans who have bought this or that liberal lie. But the truth is, the Christian worldview not only is the basis of Western civilization, not only is how you got a free society in America, the Christian worldview is what works. There actually is a creator. He actually has established laws for how things operate. If I go out and I refuse to put motor oil in my car, I'm eventually going to burn up the engine. Right. Sin is no different. Yep. If I sleep with enough women, my diseases will get diseases, and it's just going to be a disaster. Right. And all these things work because they're true. God created you. God told you how to live because that's what works. And he is very much offended by your failing to do so. And since you're going to, he sent his only begotten son to die in the place of all the rest of us, because that sin is not a small thing. It's treason against the king of the universe. Right. Treason is punishable by death, and you will die and go to hell if you don't accept Jesus Christ as your Lord and Savior. And yet he has provided that way, purely of grace. And so, when we love Christ, when we confess with our mouth that he is Lord and believe in our heart that God raised him from the dead, we shall be saved. And we should be talking about that. And it's wonderful that J.D. Vance presented that better than I just did. Just did a tremendous job of it. People should talk about that because there are implications of it. And I'll just give you one.
Yeah, that's exactly
Donald
the
Trump
point.
is going after DEI. DEI is just absolute racism and sexism. It completely violates the Civil Rights Act of 1964. It is the opposite of Martin Luther King's vision, but it's also the opposite of the gospel. The gospel says there is no Jew or Greek, there is no slave or free. We are all one in Christ. And obviously not those who reject him, but in general, this is true. So that being the case, how would you have racism? Now, I know Christians are sometimes racists, but they're inconsistent Christians when they are. We're all cousins. We're all descended from Noah. We're all descended from Adam. So it doesn't matter where you live in the world or what you believe. You're my cousin, literally, biologically. And that's the Christian worldview. And it makes possible you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Every single thing the left preaches is about division and hatred of other people by dividing us into smaller and smaller interest groups that are at war. And that is a fundamentally satanic approach to life. And it definitely comes from their father, the devil.
Yeah, absolutely. Well put, Rod. So let me ask you, why do you think that has become such an integral part of not just MAGA, I suppose, I mean, certainly MAGA, but, kind of spilling over from MAGA to just the right? Why do you think all of that you just said is true, has become so integral to this whole political counter-revolution?
I think Christians for many decades now have been cowed into submission. Even 25, 35 years ago, when Christianity was talked about much more openly, it was always couched in euphemism and, really, really careful not to offend anybody. Well, the gospel is an offense. Jesus literally says they will hate you because they hated me first. Right. So, honestly, the stuff they believe is offensive and they're not afraid to say it. Right. So I think the defining moment, not the first moment, not the last moment, but the moment at which it crystallized was another J.D. Vance moment in the interview where he's getting all this just liberal claptrap from this interviewer. And he just looks at her and he says, "I really don't care, Margaret." It's like, whoa.
Something I have retweeted much of the time.
Yeah, you have to be emotionally manipulated. You have to control you. And he's just like, "Nah, I don't think so. I'm going to tell you what I think."
Yeah, and I really don't care, Margaret.
Right. If Christians will say what they really think, we can have a legitimate debate between our worldview and these other people's worldview, and people can decide for themselves. That's the essence of freedom. People can listen to the arguments and make a decision. But the truth of the matter is, we have lived in a system for so long where only one side is presented as legitimate, right, that we weren't really able to have a legitimate debate. Yeah. And that's what's changed. That's why they're just going crazy over Trump.
He has come in and is in the process of knocking down that house, analogous house I talked about earlier, and is rebuilding. He's got some of those pieces in it, but most of them are getting thrown out into the trash. Rod, we're going to wrap up here, but I want to leave before I give you a chance to tell people where they can find you and all that good stuff. So here, the easiest question you got all day. Not that any of them are hard, but the easiest one, how can people find you?
Well, they need to come to rodmartin.org. We publish a lot of great long-form content there every single day. If you really want to understand an issue, we'll break it down for you where it is understandable. It's academic in a sense, it's intellectual in a sense, but it is written for regular folks. And so come to rodmartin.org. While you're there, click on the tab up in the left-hand top. to find me on X. I've added about 10,000 followers on X just since yesterday evening.
Wow.
That's just growing like a weed. I'm over 150,000 followers now, and I'll be over 200,000 before the end of the month. And you don't want to miss out on that. We publish a lot of threads on X that break down issues even more simply than we do on rodmartin.org. And they come with pictures. They are all illustrated. So that's fun. And that appeals to some people that don't want to read a 1,000-word essay. Sure. But if you want the 1,000-word essay, we have there. It.
Yep.
Come to rodmartin.org.
Well, that's how I found you, brother. I mean, that was great. And as soon as I boom.
Wonderful.
Yeah, I DM'd you and said, hey, we need to talk. Rod Martin, thank you very much for coming on, brother. Much, much appreciated.
Thank you.
All right. Well, that's it for today, folks. Rod joining us, Rod Martin. I'm certainly going to have him back on. It's just great, easy to understand, easy, digestible information. It's very good. But in the meantime, that's it for today. As we said, coming to you from Houston, Texas. Yeehaw! Guys from Florida can't say yeehaw, by the way. I'm Gary Michael Voris. God love you.